Hello, good afternoon, Professor Claudia.
Hello.
A very warm welcome to you once again. So happy to see you on screen. You're doing well. I will not share much, but let me say to my friends present here that Professor Claudia is an inspiration. She's a warrior. She's a warrior, and she always wins.
Could I respond to that quickly?
Of course.
Because I have known Vibha since 2014, I think it was, when you gave a talk at Stockholm University, and I was so impressed with what she had to say. She brought Indian literature alive. So I asked her if she could imagine coming to Stockholm for what we just had instituted, a 5-week seminars, where we invited scholars from around the world to stay in Stockholm for 5 weeks, to give one lecture per week, and the rest of the time would be set up for their own research. And Vibha graciously said she would come, and it was a huge success. And I must say, you have changed my understanding of Asian literature even quite a lot. And I would also like to say something about this course. I know it's later this afternoon, but something that has struck me is, I remember when we were talking, Vibha, I said, I couldn't possibly imagine coming to India. I was in India in the 80s, and it's such a difficult way to travel, and I'm so bound up in my life. But now I find myself wishing I could have been there in place, because it's such an engaging course, and I would have liked to interact with the students and get some insights, because you invited me, Vibha. I hope I can leave a lecture that sort of resonates with you and your students.
Professor Claudia has introduced me to the Stockholm University's Department of English. She's the one because of whom I have developed this long association. And I now feel that I am a part of Stockholm University's Department of English in a way, because I've visited it so many times, and I have learned a lot. Your worldview has been able to has actually empowered my vision to teach and to look at the diverse perspectives about India and how to speak about them, how to respect them, and how to carry them forward as part of my knowledge. And I'm sure that today, when you are going to speak, because you speak so nicely, you have such a wonderful aura that when you start speaking, everybody is going to enjoy this lecture. Now I hand it over to Umara to formally invite the speaker, and without much ado. Thank you, Umara. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you, ma'am. Moving on to our next segment, as ma'am introduced, I invite Professor Claudia Eggerer for her lecture titled Alternate Histories, Human-NonHuman Entanglements in Tuareg Culture and Art. Professor Claudia, welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Can I ask a question? Because I have a PowerPoint which I sent to the course team. Did
yes.
you
Yes,
were able to, you opened it, yes?
Yes, sure. Just
okay, great. Great, thank you. Then let me start without much further ado. I changed the title slightly, which is typically of me because I keep thinking, and it's now called Nomad Histories, Human-NonHuman Entanglements in Tuareg Culture and Art, because I think nomadic histories differ greatly from what we normally call history. Okay,
is my all?
It's loading now, I see, the PowerPoint.
Just a second, I'm so sorry about this.
Okay, thank you very much. I see that you now have the title page where you see nomads, and you see the men on their white Mehari camels performing a dance on the camels, and we'll talk a little bit more of their culture later. But let me now begin with that the observation that we live in times of change. And Margaret Atwood said it's not climate change, it's everything change. And she wrote this in 2015. And for her, this historical moment is very much defined by the climate change, which is quickly turning into a climate crisis. And she says, this is not least a change that requires us to rethink categories of thought we have used so long that they now seem natural to us. For instance, we have been taught to think that there are two histories, human history and natural history, where the human is thought to be in control of both. And human history is, of course, the history of culture, whereas the natural world is perceived to be outside and maybe in opposition to culture. So two different histories of culture. But increasingly, this understanding is questioned, and the environmental humanities argue that we live in multi-species entanglements with the natural world, which actually is not very different from what many Indian novelists have shown to us. And I'm thinking of a story that Amitav Ghosh exchanged with us when he was in Stockholm. He talked about Bibi, the lady of Bon Bibi, the lady of the forest. Okay, and in 2009, Dipesh Chakrabarty's seminal The Climate of History, please take the next slide. Okay, provides us with a scientific frame. And he said, climate change is happening now, history in the making, so to speak, and this demands a response from the species that is giving its name to the epoch, that is living in the Anthropocene, that's the age of the human, involves the recognition of the vast impact our species has had and still has on the climates and ecosystems of the planet, even in a geological sense. Humanity is now a geological agent. And just to sort of abbreviate Chakrabarty's history, that really changed our understanding of history. The timescales of human history have become entangled in geological epochs. So we are now leaving a mark on the planet. The human is, therefore, a geological agent for all time to come. Hence, climate change collapses the distinction between natural and human history, because human history and natural history are so entangled in each other. And this calls the human exceptionalism, that is, that the human stands above everything else, that has steered our thinking since the Enlightenment into question. So he believes we now have to work with this entanglement of histories. But this involves also, as Amitav Ghosh reminds us, a powerful challenge to the idea of freedom, central not only to contemporary politics, but also to the humanities, the arts, and to literature. And next slide, please. He goes on to argue that since the Enlightenment, the focus has been on humanity, and non-human forces and systems had no place in this calculus of liberty. Indeed, being independent of nature was considered one of the defining characteristics of freedom itself. So in order to be free, you had to be free of nature. You were outside nature, you were in control of nature. And he says, what climate change is doing is it's forcing us to recognize that we have never been free of non-human constraints. It raises the question of how we are to rethink those earlier conceptions of history. The question that has bearing on art and literature, and particularly in regards to 20th century, is this radical turn away from the non-human to the human, from the figurative to the abstract. And in the same vein, Dipesh Chakrabarty, in a later text, stresses the need to rethink the human condition. And he says, most of us live as if we don't believe what we know. So we question our own knowledge because it is too difficult to take in. And he says, we have to reconceptualize history, including our terminology, as terminology steers our thinking. And this he said at his lecture at the inauguration for the Center of Excellence for Anthropocene History at the Royal College of Technology here in Stockholm last year. And maybe now we can have the next slide. He argues that the global belongs to the recorded history of 550 years and corresponds with the human dominant order of life. The planetary, on the other hand, is about deep history, the geobiological history of the Earth system, and as such reminds us that humans are actually a minority form of life. After plants, the majority forms of life, both by weight and numbers, are the microbiome. So we are really not the masters of the planet, even if that is what we think. We could say that where the global is of a moral political nature, planetary forces reduce us to our creaturely lives. So we become hopefully a little bit more humble. Now I would like to turn to Ghosh again. You see, I'm jumping between two Indian thinkers and writers that have influenced me quite a lot. So I'm going back to Ghosh and The Great Derangement, which he published 2016. Before I talk about Tuareg culture and literature, which is shaped by and embodied their extraordinary affinity with the environment and with a kind of human-non-human kinship as its basis. In the first part of The Great Derangement, Stories, Ghosh puts the question why climate change casts a much smaller shadow on literature than it does on the world. He answered it by pointing to the dissonance between the narratives we take seriously and the realities of the world itself. While fiction, and the novel in particular, would appear to be best suited to meet the challenges the climate crisis poses to our imagination, Ghosh contrarily contends that the modern novel is ill-suited to rise to that challenge, seeing that it's turned away from the narratives of the improbable to the believable. And what he's doing here is, of course, he's talking about a realist fiction. And immediately notes that one of the ironies of realist fiction is precisely that the very gestures with which realism conjures up reality are actually also a concealment of the real. At the same time as he ostensibly outlines the reasons for the failure of the contemporary novel and the literary imagination to convincingly engage with climate change, his text is also eerily interspersed with a narrative that runs counter to this claim. An example would be Ghosh's recognition of the entanglement of the cultural and the personal, the physical and the metaphysical, the human and the non-human. And in this, he is activating an ancient deep knowledge, visceral, pre-linguistic, the source and content of our literary heritage. And if we now move to the next slide, you will see a quote I've taken from his Stories, and it's an anecdote about the flooding of the river Padma in Bangladesh in the 1850s. It's drowning the village and unmooring his ancestors, which sets the tone to how he engages with this bit of history, where personal history and geological history intertwines. To this day, when I think of the circumstances that have shaped my life, I remember the elemental force that untethered my ancestors from their homeland and launched them on a series of journeys that preceded and made possible my own travels. When I look into my past, the river seems to meet my eyes, staring back as if to ask, do you recognize me wherever you are? So this is on page 4 in his book. And from the very beginning, his narrative establishes this intimate relationship with the river in communication with it and based on a mutual recognition. And recognition is one of the key terms that Ghosh is working with, because recognition, he insists, doesn't require an exchange of words, because, and I quote, more often than not, we recognize mutely. For him, there's always an element of prior awareness involved, which, when it resurfaces, instantly changes our understanding of what it is we see, just as his ancestors, flooded by the river, awoke to the recognition of a presence that had molded their lives to the point where they had come to take it as much for granted as the air they breathe. What Ghosh is sketching here captures that uncanny moment when it dawns on his ancestors and his readers, I would say, that the familiar river, the backdrop to their lives, is an all-encompassing presence that may have its own purposes about which we know nothing. So the river knows something and has purposes that we are not aware of, but we are subject to them, as the flooding shows. And this uncanny moment springs from the recollection of what we have chosen to forget, yet faintly remember still. The knowledge of our kinship with the non-human world, the complex interaction of human and non-human environments, what Ghosh identifies as, and I quote, this renewed awareness of the elements of agency and consciousness that humans share with many other beings, and even perhaps the planet itself. Not surprisingly, the uncanny re-emerges in context of his discussion of climate change, seeing that no other word comes close to expressing the strangeness of what is unfolding around us, he says, where the familiar has taken on an unexpected sense of menace and uncertainty. And I think we all understand what he means. Even Europe, we always thought we were above natural disaster, has been hit by flooding. So Goethe's environment and its environmental uncanny invokes Freud's uncanny in the sense of, and I quote, it's leading back to what is known of old and long familiar. Hence it pertains to a half-forgotten bond humans share with natural, non-human forces and beings. And then Ghosh asks whether it's a coincidence that we have become aware at precisely this moment in history, and I quote, that there are entities in the world like forests that are fully capable of inserting themselves into our processes of thought. And here I think of a German forester who has written a book which is talking about the hidden life of trees, where he identifies the interaction, the communication between the forest, where he talks about they talk via the mycines of mushrooms. So he talks about the wood wide web, not the world wide web. And the wood wide web is far older than our world wide web, on which we're now communicating, as you know. So he says that if we believe that, if there is something outside that has a kind of awareness and intelligence, then this constitutes the most uncanny of challenges that climate change has thrown at humanity and our Enlightenment ideas of human exceptionalism. People everywhere have known for the longest time that animals possess emotions and intelligence, and nowhere is this awareness of non-human agency more evident than in the tradition of narrative and literature, especially. He mentions Indian epics as well as the Odyssey here. So Ghosh's text differs from mainstream Anthropocene writing not only in its insistence on the crucial role that imaginative narrative plays for our understanding of the havoc we are imposing on our planet, but also in its Asian focus and rootedness in an Asian literary tradition. He does so, however, without losing sight of global, or maybe keeping Chakrabarti in mind, we should say planetary implications, consistently invoking the, and I quote, insistent, inescapable continuities, the animated forces unleashed today that are nothing if not inconceivably vast, driving home the insight that the waters that are invading the Sundarbans are also swamping Miami Beach. Again, a planetary perspective. Water serves here again as a trope and the connective element, which it is, alerting us to a world of complex entanglements where boundaries, physical, metaphysical, political, or rhetorical, cannot uphold the fantasies of containment humanity so vainly clings to. As such, Ghosh's text is a testament to the belief in the power of storytelling, where he engages the topic of climate change, not with figures or statistics, but with the human beings, but with what human beings have always used to think with most naturally and powerfully, that is, stories. So now, if we move to the next slide, I can move on to my discussion of the Tuareg, their culture and their place in history, and which is basically much conjecture. We don't know that much about ancient history, but let me see how far we get. So the next slide should show you yes, there you see a woman on the white Mehari camel, which you can't see it here, but it's actually a dromedary because it has only one hump. And it also shows the extremely intricate artwork of the Tuaregs. This is made of leather and all these lovely colors. And we see more artwork as a kind of illustration as we move on. But let me now continue with these fascinating nomads. Riding on their white Mehari camels, clad in indigo-tinted cloth, the Tuareg, often romanticized as the blue men of the desert, because the blue cloth also sort of tinges their own skin, or they're demonized as raiders of caravans, notorious for their razzias and their skills in warfare. They have caught the Western imagination. What we haven't understood for the longest time is that Tuareg culture is characterized by its extraordinary affinity with the Sahara, because they are finding their way where others are lost, surviving where life seems almost impossible. Their depth of knowledge about their environment is illustrated by the well-known fact that as late as the early 20th century, several of the most skilled Saharan guides were blind. They navigated by smell, by the wind and the taste of the soil, and their senses, of course, were heightened by the lack of sight. And isn't that amazing? Blind men were guiding caravans through this empty space, arid space of the Sahara. So the desert is their home, and despite the many shortcuts that have made our world shrink, think of phones, think of airplanes, think of, you know, what we're doing right now, speaking over not Zoom, but what is it? It's another Zoomy thing. You see, I'm not much fond of this. Okay, forget I said that. So while the world is shrinking, the Sahara has largely remained an entirely alien world to minds used to Western rationality and a veneration of speed. A Tuareg guide put the differences like this: Westerners have watches, we have time. And isn't that the truth? So today in our world, we talk about de-acceleration. It's not a problem for the Tuareg. But let me ask you a question. What do you think is the most common and also the most efficient mode of transport in the desert? Any ideas? Waterways. Okay, camel is what I think 95% of everybody I've asked has said. You'll be surprised, the most efficient and still most common way of transporting yourself and others through the desert is by walking. And even caravans, they are led most of the time because the animals are used as beasts of burden. So they're very seldom ridden. They're actually led through. So they're walked through the desert. That was a surprise to me as well. But apparently, our two legs are still very functional and work very much in the desert. Now, back in time. For millennia, the Tuareg, a Berber people, have survived in one of the most pitiless environments of the planet. Indeed, they have fine-honed the art of finding their way through the Tenere, which is literally desert in their language, an arid region of sand devoid of plant life, covering 400,000 square kilometers in the south-central Sahara, which was basically where they were based. Known for their unrivaled knowledge of the perilous routes across the Sahara, the Tuareg established lucrative trade routes transecting the desert, facilitating highly sought-after commercial connections between northern and western coastal settlements, the African interior and the Middle East. So they controlled trade for the longest time. And prior to the disruptions caused by French colonialism and independent nation states, Mali and Niger, these clans were often coordinated in managing subsistence in Sahara Desert and Desert French Sahelian savanna regions. And now is a term that is just as vital for the Tuareg as freedom, and that is mobility, which means free passage for caravans throughout the region. French colonial powers tried, of course, to control the caravan trade by setting up borders, crushing much of the trans-Saharan trade, which interfered with delicate ecological, social, and political balances. To begin with, these trade routes were only possible because their leaders' relationship with many different clans of fellow Tuaregs located along the way. We talk about this in more detail later. Tuaregs live in smaller clans, not as one huge group, which makes sense in a desert if it's to sustain your life. So the relationships between different leaders of clans were vital for the caravan trains to go through. They granted them not only access to invaluable watering points and grazing pockets in exchange for supplies and items of value, but they also formed a conduit of information. So these caravans were what you might call the kind of replacement of phones, a little bit slower, maybe letters is a better metaphor, but still, it was surprisingly sufficient and quick how information got passed on through these caravans. Though remote and not easily accessible for outsiders, the Sahara has always been a vibrant crossroad of trading, of religious scholarship, of culture, of the arts. And that is something that I think is important to remember, that albeit the Tuareg live with very little possessions as nomads in the Sahara, they are a highly cultural group of people with a long tradition that they venerate. They have their own culture and their own religions, and they are on a par in wisdom and knowledge with more civilized societies. Much about the Tuareg is still a mystery. For instance, where they're from, where their language, Tamashek or Tifinagh, a system of codes, derives from. Their unexpected mix of Islam with magic and matrilineal society. Could we have the next slide, please? Something we also don't know much about is the origin of their veil, the tagelmust. It's a complete mystery. It's worn all the time, and as you see here, it's covering the entire face. Only the eyes, even the nose, only the eyes are visible. And this one is obviously also dyed in this dark blue color. We think they were originally worn to protect the head and sun from sun and sand. But we also know that it's worn as a sign of respect to other men and to keep out evil spirits, the jinns. And it is now one of the markers of what it means to be a Tuareg. You wear this as a sign of your cultural and personal identity. It's believed that in antiquity, the Tuareg moved southwards from the Tafilalt region into the Sahara under the Tuareg founding queen Tin Hinan, sometime between the 4th and 5th centuries, a long time ago. As the aridity of northern and western Africa continued to intensify, the Tuareg populations were forced to restrict their nomadic pastoralist existence more and more to the southern edge of the Sahara, known as the Sahel. This means shore, I'm told, in Arabic, and the Sahel is a 200-300 kilometer wide transitory ecosystem between the true deserts of the north and milder savanna to the south. So it's an intermediate area. And we must remember that the Tuaregs are creations of the desert, so molded by nomadic lifestyle where the central values are respect, self-control, and dignity. So the Tuareg has never been known to be a slave, for instance. They kept slaves, but they were never slaves themselves. Mobility is an essential part of the livelihood system of the Tuareg, just as relationships and freedom. So mobility, freedom, and relationships. These are the cornerstones of Tuareg values and existence. Constraints of movement are among the most important threats to Tuareg life, just as relationships because they need to move across the desert in search of water, pasture, trade, but also to keep and strengthen alliances. Today, most Tuareg populations are based in the mountainous chains of the central and southern Sahara, the Haga and the Tassili Mountains in Algeria, the Air Mountains in Niger, and the Adra and Nifugas in Mali. By the way, the Tuareg are today spread over 5 nation states. So I mentioned Mali, I mentioned Niger, I should add Burkina Faso, and of course Algeria as well. So they are spread in smaller groups, and they're still surviving. We think that there are around 2 million Tuareg today. But initially, when the Arabs arrived in North Africa in the 6th century, most of the original Berber people, including the Tuareg, resisted Islam, in part because their culture and social institutions were very different from Arab institutions. They did not convert until various times between the 8th and the 12th centuries. So even though most or almost all Tuareg adhere to Islam today, and officially there's a Quranic inheritance, which gives 2/3 of property to the male heir and only 1/3 to the female heir, many Tuareg practice additional inheritance forms that compensate women for that disparity. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, here you see the name of the Tuareg, because it's also something that nobody knows for certain. We know it's been applied to them by the Arabs, coming from the name of the province Targa. So Targoi means men from Targa. But if Targa instead is derived from the Arabic verb of tarak, Targi could mean nocturnal visitor, itinerant, outlawed, and so by extension, a man abandoned by God. So these two meanings sort of oscillate in the name of Tuareg. But Tuareg is what they're mostly called by outsiders because they have their own names for themselves. Depending upon dialect, they refer to themselves as Ifomach, Imohach, Imahayan, words derived from the same root, the verb Iohach. Excuse my bad pronunciation, which means it is free, it is pure, it is independent. So here you have how a Tuareg thinks of himself: pure, free, independent. And very often they also refer to themselves as Kel Tamashek, the people who speak Tamashek, where the prefix Kel means the people of which, combined with the place, identifies the large Tuareg groups or confederations or drum groups as they're already known. Next slide, please. Okay, now we look at earlier records of the Tuareg. Francis Rod published in 1926 The Origin of the Tuareg for the Geographical Journal in England. And he was quite correct in many ways. He said it's not a tribe, but a race of many clans, one of the oldest in North Africa. And he also understood that nomads successfully resisted the French and the European penetration into the Sahara. And he affirms that nowhere are the Tuareg slaves or underdogs. So they might be a small populations, but they are strong and they know their own worth. He tells us that most striking outward peculiarity is that the men go veiled, their women never veil themselves at all. That has changed today. Women also veiling themselves, albeit not in the same intricate way as their men do. The most important of all their characteristics is that the women are free, if not freer than in England. And that, you may imagine, did make quite a stir, because we in the West seem always to think that we are first with everything and the most concerned when it comes to women's liberation. They choose their own husbands, own property, and have male friends that are not relations. All these things, you may know, are not really common in many Islamic communities. Could we have the next slide, please? Okay, here you have a photograph of Tuareg women under a tent. They're sitting there chatting with their children. Most probably they're also telling stories, because that falls on women. And in Tuareg society, even today, women enjoy a high degree of free sociability, even in public, as well as a high social prestige and economic independence. In most groups, particularly the more nomadic groups in the mountains, the major source of women's wealth was in livestock. They can represent themselves legally. They have the right to initiate divorce. Most women can visit and travel freely, which is also, and they've done that all the time. So it's an ancient history. In general, most Tuareg men will still tell you they respect women and that women should be treated equally. Matrilineal involves tracing your descent to the female ancestral culture hero, think Tininan, the very first, and passing property through women on the mother's side. So the daughters inherit the livestock and the tent of the mother. But matrilineal is not matriarchy. It doesn't mean that women rule. In Tuareg society, men have tended to be official leaders, the chiefs, the heads of the confederations, and, not to forget, warriors. Women traditionally transmitted the oral stories from one generation to the next and taught tifinach, which they could have learned to write in the sand. And since the stories that they traditionally tell also are a repository of their history, we learn about their history in two ways: from their traditional stories and from the outsiders who sort of got to know them. There were geographers in the beginning, then there were all kinds of Europeans who tried to describe and understand the Tuareg. They were fascinated, wanted to understand more. But the stories contain how the Tuareg recorded their histories. Lots of the poetry is about warfare, for instance. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? That's an interesting one. Okay, first a few words about Mano Dayak, who was a well-known Tuareg leader. He led a rebellion in the 1990s, and he died in a plane crash in 1995 on his way to a secret meeting with the Prime Minister in Niger. A friend of mine knows him or knew him personally, so it was a great tragedy when they came to Niger in 1996 and he was dead. Why I include him here is not just his history as fighting Tuareg, fighting for Tuareg life. He also talks about the importance of women and especially the mother. So there is not a Tuareg who doesn't exalt their mother. She is the soul and the heart of the desert. She does the hardest work when the caravans leave. She looks after the animals, grinds the corn, and educates the children. She's gay and happy. In the evening, she sings, dances, recites poetry, and plays the imsad with melodies that calm or exalt women and men. Could we have the next slide, please? Here you see women bashing on millet, because millet is the main source of sustenance together with camel's milk and goat's milk. And when somebody is ill, you will slaughter a goat, so you will eat the goat's meat as well. Okay, could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, now we have a few impressions of what it's like to live in the desert as a Tuareg. These are typically the tents. We can move to the next slide. Here you see their handicraft and their artwork. You see this wonderful silver bag with tassels, and in the back you see leather work, which they're famous for. Next slide, please. This is the Agades cross, which is very important in Tuareg culture and history, and it's worn by the men and women alike. Next slide, please. Here you see the Tuareg swords. As I said, Tuaregs are warriors and they're good at it. Their guerrilla warfare has made it really difficult for the French to subdue them. Actually, they never really did it. Sorry. Okay, next slide, please. And this here is a child's toy. It's made of rope, so in the shape of a dromedary. So children have handmade toys, and this is a piece of art, I think. Next slide, please. And this is important. I'm sorry, I don't have a better picture, but this is women playing the imsad, and the imsad is one-stringed violin that is used in Tuareg culture to accompany when poetry is read. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? Okay, and this is Agadez, known as the gateway to the desert. A photo taken by a friend of mine who traveled there. It's enormously beautiful, isn't it? Next slide, please. Okay, now this is one of the tales of the Tuareg. It's called an Imayan, which is normally a work of spoken literature about family life, animals, ancestral tales. And this is an ancestral tale which is passed on between the generations, and it has a moral to it. It begins with two children losing their mother and their father remarrying, and the mother had left a goat with her two children, a girl and a boy, and surprisingly, by the will of Allah, the goat in the evenings gave gold and milk instead of relieving itself. So it's these two girls, these two children grew up very strong, whereas the children of the stepmother didn't grow up strongly as well at all, even though she fed them the best she could. So she sort of took a look at what is happening there, and then she saw this, that the goat is behind their riches and their good health. So she tells her husband when he comes back that, oh, I'm so sick, which means he has to slaughter a goat to feed her. But it seems to be completely impossible to slaughter this goat. It seems to have 1,000 lives. So he says, okay, this is my daughter. She has sort of jinxed this. And he beats her. And then, as by miracle, the goat dies. And the meat is eaten by the stepmother and her children. Then father and his new family move away with the son, leaving the badly beaten girl tethered to the goat's skin in the desert. Halfway off, the brother says, no, I have to return. I forgot my whip. I have to go back. So he goes back, and what does he see? He sees that his sister is has a goat again. So the goat's skin had reincarnated as a goat. And at that time, a caravan with a prince came by. You recognize the tale now, don't you? And the prince, looking at this beautiful young girl, fell in love with her and married her and took her home to be his bride. The father heard about this and visited his daughter, and she made a feast to his honor. And she fed him liver, heart. And after the feast, the princess, and this is, you have to read this because I can't sort of gloss this over so nicely. So after the feast, the princess came to greet her father. She sat beside him and said, I salute you, my dear father. I hope you're comfortable in this tent. I also hope that the meal was good. Yes, my lovely daughter, the father said. Everything is perfectly well. Then the princess continued, what about the meal you were served? Wasn't there anything missing? Next slide, please. He quickly remembered. Yes, there were a number of things missing on the table, he said. The meat of the head was not there. The princess triumphantly responded, "Oh, where was your head when you chose to tie me and abandon me all alone in the desolate desert?" The princess pressed him further. What else was missing? Her father blushed with embarrassment, saying, "The heart was missing too." The princess, still gleeful, replied, "Oh, where was your heart when you chose to tie me and abandon me all alone in the desolate desert?" The princess once again, "Anything else?" Her father, now very uncomfortable, well, the liver was missing too. The princess, now overwhelmingly victorious, "Oh, where was your liver when you chose to tie me and abandon me all alone in the desolate desert?" Of these questions, the father answered none. He felt guilt and was full of remorse. So, next slide, please. But this gives you a neat example of how morals were transformed into stories. We have the same in our literary histories, of course. But this is a story that's apparently well known, and every Tuareg clan uses it. This slide here is about the Tifinagh script. I wanted you to see what it looks like, because it's an ancient type of script. And traditionally, it's learned by writing it in the sand. And this is one that I found where the moon landing is written in Tifinagh and then translated into English in our writing. So, journey to the moon, a wonderful event. A plane landed twice on the moon. Flags from all nations have been put there, even the flag of Niger. And I think I'm not the only one who thinks this is a little bit ironic, right? Because if anything, Tuareg are not concerned with national countries or national boundaries and borders. Next one, please. I think we're running out of time, are we? Okay, this is another Tuareg poem, and it is transcribed. Unhappiness, 7 times unhappiness to the man who shows his mouth, which is an impure well inhabited by the devil of language, his mouth, which is the sacred home of the angel of words. The law of the dark veil is for me clearer than light. The law which commands one to hide one's face, to anger, to pride, to suffering, to love, and even death. Here, of course, we have a poem that is translated first from Tifinagh, the script, into our writing, then from the Tamashek language into first French, I think, and then again into English. So we have several layers of interpretations here, but it shows that language is a two-folded thing, right? It can be one or the other. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, and this is a very famous poem. It was also put into music by Tenariwen, which is a Tuareg group, very famous even in the West. And this one has been translated into English in 2015, so that's fairly recent. I am a lone traveler of the desert. Nothing is surprising. I tolerate the wind. I tolerate thirst and the sun. I know how to walk until dusk in the flat, empty desert where nothing is given, always alert by the mountains where I was born, which I have climbed up and down. I know where water hides. These concerns are my companions, always familiar, the story of my life. I included this because it neatly encapsulates the cultural identity of the Tuareg, their understanding of the world, their understanding of the desert. They also blend Islam religion with the kind of magic that many desert dwellers have. So it seems that they have taken bits and pieces from new things to add and adapt to their existing beliefs. So they are, if anything, a resilient people. I've lost track of time. Viba, will you let me know how much I have? Okay, then I assume I have time. Do I have time?
Yes, ma'am, you can continue.
Okay, sorry about this break and everything, but I wanted to play you the interpretation, the musical interpretation, and in Tamashek by Tinariwen, so you get an impression of the Tuareg soul. Could we then move to the next slide and try and see if we can play the YouTube clips?
Ma'am, this is appearing as an image in my
Okay,
computer.
then we forget about it. Okay, and I move on. Yeah, it worked when I tried it at home, but sometimes they are lost in transit. Okay, thank you very much for trying. Can we go to the next slide then? Okay, this is, you have to turn your head to see this. This is something that's also very central in Tuareg culture, and that's l'arbre qui parle, the talking tree. And these trees are very often agars, which the Tuareg believe are inhabited by spirits. What this talking tree does, it is inscribed with messages in Tifinagh. And it's a kind of historical depository of messages. They are of the type maybe of graffiti. They're love love messages, directions. If you want to go there, do that, and if you meet him, do that. But also they record some local and specific information that is necessary if there's a flooding somewhere or if there's a drought somewhere. So. And also, they are meeting points. This is where people assemble, and you can't see much here, but the thorny crown both provides shade for humans and their animals, but it also provides sustenance for the camels who can eat this. It doesn't look very tasty, but they apparently live off it and can eat it. And as such, it is a central part of history keeping. So history is both orally transcribed, but also not only passed on by mouth, but also passed on through the Tifinagh writing. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Okay, Tuaregs also have proverbs, and some of them are very close to ones I recognize from my own literary inheritance. There are things that are allowed in religion that are forbidden by tradition. And here we get the interpretation that this proverb underlines the fact that cultural identity exists independently of religion with regards to adherence to Islam for the Tuareg. So we take what works for us, but we keep what has worked for us for ages. The next one is interesting. The old woman who is sitting down sees what the young man who is standing cannot see. Well, this is a saying that the Tuareg use when someone has not taken into consideration the point of view of someone who thinks he is insignificant. This is not far from our saying, don't judge a book by its cover. So be a little bit more interested in what's written or said or not said between the lines. Next slide, please. Okay, now we come to Mahmoud and Hawad. a Tuareg poet who lives in the West now, but who writes still in Tamashek, who is very much engaged in the Tuareg course and especially in keeping alive the poetic inheritance. If you can have the next slide. So this poet and painter of the Sahara was born in the 1950s in the Air Mountains in what today is Niger. Yet Hawad refuses to identify with this state. He uses Tuareg area as his place of origin. He was born into a family which is part of the large Kel-Air Tuareg group. And he remembers and recounts many crossings over the Sahara and the Sahel on camelback while he was growing up with his brothers and fathers. So, in his own words, I'm part of the Imasichen Tenere people. The Amathis is the desert in central Sahara. It is there that the Amathis civilization and our writing were born. Our civilization began after the Neolithic era. It's that ancient. Next slide, please. Our ancestors, my parents, and up to my generation, all of us suffered from hunger. We were hungry with hunger, thirsty with thirst. We transformed hell into paradise, the Sahara, from scratch. Why? Because we gave up everything but the ideal of being free. Next one, please. And this is how he sees what's happening. Can we have the earlier one, please? Okay. Our ancestors, my parents, and up to my generation, all of us suffered from hunger. We were hungry with hunger, thirsty with thirst. We transformed hell into paradise, the Sahara, from scratch. Why? Because we gave up everything but the ideal of being free. And I think this is at once a very heartbreaking, but also promising statement. Because what is most important is not what you own, what you have. You may survive hunger, you may survive thirst. But it's not that what turns hell into paradise. It's the ideal of being free. And so this mobility, moving from place to place, only with the support of your own body, your animals, and the relationships you have with other groups is still the most important thing. And this is at the heart of their history too. It's a history of mobility, which means that their history consists of a number of smaller histories, slightly differing depending on at what time they were moving where. So this is now we can have the next slide, please. And this is what he thinks about writing, what writing means to him. I was born into writing. What is writing for us? It means writing from signs we already had, and which came from our animals. We made them into symbols and then letters which have evolved over time. These letters are not just letters. For us, they are the topography of our mental structure. So Tifinagh is not just a tool of writing, it's a topography of Tuareg mental structure. For me, writing in my language is simply natural, but it is much more than that. It is our way of life. We have our own alphabet. Since my childhood, we would write everywhere, in the sand, on the stones. The alphabet of my people is called Tifinagh, and now I can't read my own slide. Ah, yes, it's called Tifinagh, and it is different from that of our neighbors. Okay. We will now look at some poetry that he has written, and it comes from a collection of poetry called In the Net. And Not surprisingly, his poetry is firmly rooted in the desert, written in Tifinagh, then translated into French and English. And of course, here where you see it in English, it is closed with several versions of interpretation and a different alphabet. But I think still the kinship with the Sahara, the sense of wonder at its beauty, as well as feeling a deep sense of loss, transfuse the poems. And if we have the next slide, we can look at a poem. First, you get a little bit more of the woes of being a Tuareg. We are becoming more fragile as Tuaregs. Asceticism, the renunciation of certain things, has always been part of the Tuareg way of thinking. You must give up material wealth and give up certain tranquility, being calm. We need restlessness to reignite our collective imagination. And you may remember from what I've said that ownership is not high on the list, if on any list at all, for the Tuareg, because the only thing they own are things that are necessary and that they can carry with them. That is their tents and some of the tools they need. But it is a culture that does without a lot of property, and also doesn't want to own the place where they live. So they are an anachronism in today, you could say. Now we should get a poem if we go to the next slide. Yes. This was written in 2022. And he's talking about what's happening in the Sahel. You may know that there have been several uprisings, that it's a very unsecure area. I wanted to travel there with a friend who's been there several times, but it's impossible to travel. You can't go there. The last trip he did was in 2018. After that, everything was closed. So let's look at this poem. Now they stone you to death with their bombs, mortar arrows made from your uranium in Arlit, depleted into terror. Terror that destroys not only the evil Islamist terrorists in horrifying death, calcinating and atomizing them, but that also turns all living things into mash, anything alive daring to breathe in the Sahara. And yet, Azawad, in the Tuareg Sahara, even silence cries into the void. And what you should know, all these poems, it's an entire book of poetry. Let's see if I have it here. You can see it. If you're interested in reading something a little bit different. Oops. Difficult to see. Anyway, I can post it later. He's also a painter, so he paints. His poems are also accompanied by his drawings and paintings. Azawad is the person here, or imaginary person he addresses this to, but Azawad was also the name of the land where the Tuareg wanted to live, part of their own area, which did come to nothing. So he, in this poetry, he tries to become free from the net that is falling closer and closer, that has been cast over the Tuareg and is pulled together closer and closer, where their liberty of movement is depleting, and they are losing much of that which makes them Tuareg. And what he is doing in this poetry is saying we have to stand up, because people come now to the desert not because they like the desert, not because they want to live in the desert, but they want the minerals, they want the gold, they want to do what colonialists have done all the time. And this has actually happened after colonialism, remember? Colonialism ended officially in the 1960s in those countries, in the Sahel. But now it seems to be very interesting to be exploited. We have, I think, one more poem that we can take. Yeah, this is the sixth poem in this collection. Among us Tuaregs, Azawad, visions are a treasure with mobile energy, navigating the horizon, are movable dwellings that they have encased in a Coke bottle, tossed aside and forgotten. Azawad, be obstinate, hold on, bite into the fibers of your imagination and let go of illusory folklore of human zoos. Do you get the sense of pain in the sense of rallying. We have to survive this. We have to go on. Our visions is what keeps us alive. We cannot give up on those visions. Okay, let's see if we have one more slide. I don't see them myself. Yeah. This is just to clarify. I talked about Tuareg confederations. I talked about drum groups. And there are a number of larger groups throughout the Sahel and the Sahara. And the ones that are spread out the most are the Kel Ahaga and the Kel Ajay. And they are in Algeria and Libya, respectively. Then we have the Kel Denek and the Kel Ataram, or Iwel and Medan, of east and west of the great central plain of Azawag of Niger and Mali. Kel Aya of Aya in Niger, the Kel Adag of the Ifogas in Mali, the Kel Germer in the bend of the Niger River, the Udalan in Burkina Faso, which is an eponym without the Kel prefix. And why I take them up now is when the Tuareg led the caravans through the desert, when they moved from place to place, they would get support from these different groups. They would have relations. So that is why their freedom is based on relationships with other groups who are completely independent. They also live dependently. Some groups in the mountains would not keep cattle, for instance, or they wouldn't keep any livestock. And it is, these are still existing today, but we don't know how many exist today.
Dr. Claudia,
Yes.
we have some questions coming in. Would you like to pick up some discussions right now? Because
Can we do that?
that
Yes.
would be better.
Yes.
I can see a question here, and Professor Stefan has also joined for his tutorial, which follows your lecture.
Yes.
So this
Do we have
Vishwas Ranjan's is in chat. He has written a question. Can you see the chat?
Let's see. I can see the people. Let's see.
Can we analyze Arab imperialism or invasions as a process of colonization, especially in the context of Tuaregs and in the context of expansions done in the parts of Middle East and North Africa and West Asia, Central Asia, South Asia?
Yes, we can do that, but it seems that the Tuareg were resisting these kinds of colonial and imperial invasions far better than they do now, the invasions from the Western world, from France and also the modern life. I have a question. I have a question from. Can I take that?
Yes.
That Tuareg women are freer than ever. Now you got me. I know very little about the Chipko and Apiko movements. Can you inform me about that?
Yes, I think I would like to say about this. Chipko movement was a movement in India where women in villages of Uttarakhand, that is the foothills of Nepal, foothills of Himalayas, they were protesting against the deforestation, and they would cling around trees. And Chipko in Hindi means to cling around, to hold a tree from its bark. So women would make a chain and they would hold a tree and would not allow the deforestation. This was a massive movement, and that saved a lot of trees in the foothills of Himalaya, the forests there, the villages there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting question. And we talk about different ecosystems here, right? The Sahara is basically consisting only of sand. And what is also typical of the Tuareg is that they wouldn't understand the question, because you don't have to preserve an ecosystem. That's how they live. They live with preservation of the ecosystem. They only take what they need and leave it as they found it. You wouldn't find, Coca-Cola bottles in the Sahara where Tuareg have been, but you find it where Westerners have been. So also watering holes, they are shared. you do not take more water than you need. So there is this awareness of, well, this interrelation between the ecosystem and survival of human and beast. So you need to think about that. I hope this helps a little bit.
So, yes, are there any more questions? It would be good to wrap this up with some questions. Claudia, it's been a very, very fascinating discussion. I can go on and on it. Would you like to take 2-3 more minutes to wind up?
How many? What do you say? Sorry.
Would you like to take 2-3 more minutes to wind up?
Yes, I would like to do that. I'm very sorry that I couldn't show you the video with Tinariwen, because that gives you a really deep insight into the importance of literature, and especially poetry, in Tuareg culture, and also how it sort of transcribes history in not just in words, but also in music and in dance and movement. So it's the sort of the kind of what I would call Tuareg philosophy. And well, if I just to sort of wrap up, we see this picture of the Tuareg confederations and drum groups, and simply that people survive in smaller groups is a sign that Tuareg history is the history of the desert, marked by the non-human environment as well as human movement. So it's an interaction there. And I would also say a respect between the human and the non-human. And in the non-human, I now include the sand and the water and everything. Mobility, transhumans in some extent, shapes their culture and shapes their history. Their lives as their histories echo the conditions of the desert, of their environment, and their freedom is rooted in the need to make a living where living apparently sort of is possible but looks impossible. And they have survived, even thrived, by sticking to their desert culture. And as I said earlier, invaders have tried to impose their religion, their philosophies. And what the Tuareg have done is they have taken bits and pieces that work for them, but then they have kept their own. For instance, in terms of women's inheritance, the Tuaregs have said that women will inherit. They only get 2/3, I think, under the current system, but they get an extra third because they're women. So there is this sense of an enormous, well, what's the term I'm looking for? Resilience in the face of all the challenges that they're meeting. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm so sorry I couldn't show you the YouTube clipping.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was an interesting lecture. Now we have come to the final segment of the last session of the Gyan.
Claudia, yes, Umara, just a minute. Claudia, many thanks for this beautiful lecture, because it has added a totally different dimension to the themes that have been discussed in this course. And bringing in Tuaregs is, I must tell you, a very fresh perspective for Indian students, because very few of us are aware of it, and even lesser are known to what their literature is about. So it has been a very valuable contribution from your side. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Please stay